Hello YouTube viewers, welcome to my show Camera Tuesday. Today we're gonna take a look at the future of photography or mirrorless camera. So let's dive right into it. So what is a mirrorless camera? It's a point and shoot camera basically, because a point and shoot also does not have a mirror. Now the trick is they wanted you to have interchangeable lenses like a DSLR. That's the crucial point. And it's supposed to be smaller than a DSLR, and it's supposed to be better than point and shoot, obviously. So it's not like you're compromising your performance for the size. And basically it's supposed to replace the whole thing DSLR. Basically they want to remove that mirror that goes up and down. So how do they achieve it? One very simple thing: they use smaller sensor. Now they don't use very small sensor. They go smaller than APS-C, which is already smaller than full frame. Full frame being that 35mm film that we are used to. All the lenses in the world are calibrated to that sensor size, basically that film size. So that's why we call it full frame. Anything smaller, it will end up with a crop factor. So APS-C is generally what's most common in DSLRs, for cheap DSLRs that is. And then you have even below that, that's called micro four third, which are the backbone of this mirrorless system. And they remove mirror, which I already showed, that goes up and down. As you can see in this image, there is a mirror here. Now what they are actually gaining by removing the mirror, it's called flange distance. Basically from the last glass element of the lens to the sensor there is a distance. Now a DSLR has to have a long distance, so basically the lens has to project for longer distance. Reason for that, there has to be a mirror that goes up and down. Now when you remove that mirror, you shrink it close. However, there is still a mechanical shutter here which acts like this. And so if you remove the lens and you see without the shutter is open all the time. It generally closes only when you do the exposure and only at photographs. It won't do in video. So the benefit of that is when you use electronic viewfinder, you see what your sensor is seeing. So basically all your exposure shading, you know whether they're gonna look good or not. Basically, let's say you had ISO that will overexposed everything, you can see it. Let's say you had ISO that is too low, you will see it. Let's say shutter rate, basically you can see the final image right at the viewfinder. This is the basic core factor, because while mirror shows what your lens is seeing, you have no idea of knowing like whether the image that you thought you got versus the image your sensor actually got. So this is the the golden standard for mirrorless camera. So with all that idea of grandeur, we had a very poor start. So reason for that poor start is they said they're gonna have you interchangeable lens system, but interchangeable lens requires you to have at least few 10-20 lenses. At the beginning there were barely 5-6. So suffice to say, there was very severe shortage of lenses. On top of that, whatever lenses you were getting, they were not getting very sharp images, simply because of their reliance on on-screen autofocus system, which at that time was not refined enough, and used contrast-based autofocus, which was very slow, sluggish, and missed often. So very bad autofocus. And the final part that really pissed people off rather than trying it was that it had lower image quality. Now the reason why it had lower image quality, as you can see here, we have full frame. As you can see, APS-C is still very small. Now micro four third is also smaller than that, so image was nowhere near the ISO setting. The signal to noise ratio of the sensor was nowhere near of a normal cheap DSLR. And the clever marketing, what they did is they showed you the millimeter rating compensated for the sensor, and they were like, okay, with the crop factor they told you, okay, this is a 300mm full frame lens which will be this big, this is your micro four third. However, what they omitted from that is the aperture setting, and people forgot to multiply the crop factor to the aperture. Consequence of that, you could not get shallow depth of field. Even today you cannot get f1.8 lenses for your micro four third, because it has to become like 0.27 or something like that after the crop factor. So suffice to say, if you shallow depth of field is your bread and butter, you will not get it. So that basically trickery. People bought it like they thought, okay, f2.8 lens should give you blurry backgrounds. It didn't. So on top of that, they had ludicrously poor battery life. This was trying to make it too simple. Like, they wanted to make it compact, but they compromised on the wrong thing here. So all these things combined almost guaranteed that mirrorless camera will never, like, catch on. However, some company joined in the race at that time, primary being Samsung, Panasonic, Sony, and many others like Pentax, Olympus. All of them tried, and all of them brought their new unique things. However, with all this things, headaches, they're supposed to replace DSLR, but they were not only more expensive, they were also poor performing. So as you can see, it didn't catch on as instantaneously as people expected. Like, at the launch of these things, they were like, mirrorless is the future, but in reality, we're still using DSLR. These are the reason for that. However, with all that conflict and challenges, few winners came out. Now let's talk about Panasonic. Panasonic was the first to market it as, like, world's first mirrorless interchangeable lens camera, and they had some, well, obvious issues, obviously, but they worked their problem brick by brick. They kept building, and they had a philosophy of slow and steady improvement. So they did not try to, like, go from let's say full HD video to 8K. They tried to, like, go to full HD 60 frames per second, then full HD to 40 frames per second, then 4K 24 frames per second, 4K 60 frames per second. Brick by brick they kept. As of now, their cameras have the best price to performance in terms of videography features. Basically, they give you full list of pro functions that you can that you're supposed to have on a pro video camera that is used for proper film productions. And this was all charged by the fact they were using Sony image sensor. And Sony, while they also supply some sensors for Nikon, Sony is, like, quite good at the game. So they had a good sensor. They completely, kept working and improving this. Now they have lens lineup that is actually 20-30 lenses. So they were quite, brick by brick, they kept building. And as of now, as of making this video, they are the perfect choice of camera if you want to make YouTube videos, vlogging videos. They are perfect for it. Like, everything is nailed out, from memory size to, they also have dual cards, so in case your one card fails, you have second card backup. So suffice to say, Panasonic GH5 as of now, as of recording this, is quite a perfect camera for vlogging. Not the GS, because that does not have image sensor stabilization, which is necessary for vlogging. Now we come to the big daddy. Now, as I already mentioned, Sony sensor is, like, found on almost everything, from mobile cameras to Panasonic to Nikon itself. So Sony were background, quietly they were developing their own camera system. Before they jumped into the mirrorless system, they had their DSLR line setup, so they already had the lens. This is the crucial part. So when they came to mirrorless, they did not hold back. They went full frame. Now, full frame is compulsory. If you want to make sure your thing is sold as professional gear, it has to be standardized 35mm. So, and due to the shaved flange distances, because lens that is meant for DSLR, they have much longer throw, you can put an adapter and then attach it to your camera, and you can still get it to work. So that allowed, like, people can use manual lenses. And they already, for that camera system that they have released, already have a lot of pro lens lined up. And suffice to say, Sony, while they have a lot of issues with their camera, specifically overheating and all that, they nailed the image quality. The image quality of a Sony full frame camera is undeniably gorgeous, and low light performance is basically uncomparable. You can literally see Milky Way using it, and I'm not joking. Like, literally the ISO goes up to 500,000 ISO. So suffice to say, the low light performance is mind-boggling. And if you want to learn cinematography and, like, this is your passion, where you want to make sure your image quality is the final quality, that is your, like, final goal, to have the best image quality, not speed and production ability, but the final quality. This is undeniable. And they made their cameras, full frame cameras, competitively priced. Now this is the biggest nail in the coffin for Panasonic. So Panasonic have to make sure they release cheaper cameras now, because even though Panasonic still has some better, they are not like day and night difference nowadays. Sony released Sony A7 Mark III, which was a $2,000 camera. Now $2,000 camera, okay, but that's the same cost of Panasonic GH5. Now GH5 is a micro four thirds. This is a full frame. This is a proper professional sensor. So suffice to say, their competitive pricing is really giving them an advantage. Suffice to say, please don't buy older generation Sonys because they still are fixing a lot of bugs. So current latest one will give you very good performance. You go one back, you will still have the image quality, but the battery life would be very terrible, and they don't have touch screen. So suffice to say, Sony still has to iron out a lot of things, and the look and the feel always comes from the lens. It's not a factor of your sensor. That's why going for 35mm format is so desirable for everything from Canon, Nikon. Everybody wants to use full frame sensor for this exact reason. Your lens lineup, and that lens will give you that shallow depth of field look, that sweeping shots, the wide angle lenses, and everything combined. If you want to make a movie, Sony can now give you a very good camera. It's not, the best out there, but this is quite good, and from price to performance standpoint, they destroy everything. So you should look out for Sony. So this was my presentation. I hope you guys liked it. In that case, please leave a like. If you didn't, dislike, leave a comment, subscribe. I make video every day, and as always, thanks for watching.